Hello, my name is Joshua Mugabe. I welcome you to Evolution. The chalk cliffs at Barling Gaps, East Sussex. The chalk was formed 100 million years ago, mainly from minuscule, finely sculptured chalk plates that enclose the bodies of single-celled algae living in the plankton at that time. So when you look at this, like as if it is a rock but made of chalk, it was formed 100 million years ago, and it was made from minuscule, finely sculptured chalk plates that enclosed the bodies of single-celled algae living in the plankton at that time. So when you look at it, it's like a rock, but white in color, like chalk. The theory of evolution offers an explanation of the existence of all living organisms on Earth today and in the past. This theory, it explains the existence of living organisms on Earth today and in the past. It supposes that the present-day organisms have all been derived from organisms that lived in the past. So when you look at the present-day organism, it supposes the evolution theory that the present-day organisms, they were derived from the organisms that lived in the past. By a series of very small changes over millions of years, new species have developed from the previous species. So there has been a series of changes that have taken over a period of millions of years. Those small changes have created new species which are existing right now from the previous species. So there has been a change that has taken place from the previous one to the present one. In some cases, it appears that evolution proceeded by periods of rapid change, interspersed with periods of little or no change. Over a period of about 3,000 million years, many new species have been produced and many have become extinct. So here when we look at this diagram, we shall see that we started with a small single-celled organism, went to multicellular animals. Here there was a diversion. We had the coelentellate diverting. Then another group went up. In this group here we had the mollusks, we had the flatworms, the annelids, we had the crustacea and the insects. Those ones, they took that direction. Then there is this direction which came this way, where we had the fish branching off, we remained with the rest. Then the amphibian also branched off. Then we remained with the mammals branched off, remained with the reptiles and birds. Then they also branched and produced the birds, mammal, amphibians, reptiles, and fish. When it comes to the plants, still also up that they started with single-celled organelles and they went to multicellular plants. Here the algae branched off, the other ones took the other direction, and here they branched into two. The first branch is where we had the liverhood and then the mosses. Then we took the other one, then the ferns got off. We went to the conifers, also got off. We had the flowering plants. Then here the monocots got off. We had the dicots. And then in the dicots we have the herbs, shrubs, and the trees. So over a period of 300 million years, many species, new species were formed and many became extinct. We know a great deal about the organisms that lived millions of years ago from studying their fossilized remains. In principle, a fossil is formed when an organism dies. Its body is enclosed in mud or sand. Here we have a fish skeleton partly buried in the segment, and this is water. We have a live fish, but this one is partly buried by the sediments from the river. The soft parts decay, but some of the hard parts, like the skeleton, the shells, the seeds, these are preserved. So you will find that if you look at this organism here, you will see that the soft part has decayed and the hard parts, which are the skeleton, are the ones that are being preserved. The mud or sand eventually becomes rock, and the hard parts of the organisms are mineralized. So you can see here we have this fish which was covered in this older segment. It has become a rock, and the fish skeleton has been fossilized. Then we have these recent sediments. This one is being covered in the recent sediments, and this one is still alive. So those ones which are under the rocks, the organisms become mineralized. Sometimes an organism dies in situations which prevent its decay. For example, being overwhelmed by mud deposits. Sometimes we are saying the organism may be covered with a lot of mud, and this one may prevent it from decaying. Here we have the older rock, the recent rock, and the land is now raised above the water body. In this case, the soft part are often preserved as fossil and can be studied by cutting the section through the fossil. If the soft parts have not been decayed and they are preserved as fossil, they can be studied by cutting sections through the fossils. The whole organism may be preserved in ice. If the organism, let us say, was preserved in ice, then it would be having the soft parts with it also preserved. When the rock is exposed as a result of earth movements or erosion, the fossil remains can be dug out and studied. For example, here we are having the earth movement. They fracture the rocks, they push the rock to go up, and then this one comes down. Then the fossilized skeleton is exposed. And when it is exposed, now it can be dug out and it can be studied. The sediments eventually will become rocks. Here we are having parts living fish B and living fish B. This one dies and then closed in a sediment. Hard part fossilized. This one is fossilized. And then living fish B dies and then closed in the sediment. Hard part also fossilized. So as the fish dies, it is covered with sediments, which sediments, whenever they become very hard, the fish becomes fossilized, and then the sediments later on they become rocks, and the fossilized parts will remain in the rocks. Fish B become fossil much later than fish A. So fish A is going to become the fossil faster than fish B, because fish B, this one was deposited later on. The deeper the rock layers, the older the fossil. So here we can see that this fossil, which is in the lower, deeper rock layers, is an older fossil than this fossil which is in the upper layers. When rock strata become exposed, it can be assumed that most cases the lowest layers are the oldest. So if we have our strata here, we can take it that this lower part here is the oldest layer. The lowest part here is the oldest layer. Then we have this other layer here is in the middle layer, and then we have the upper layer here as the recent layer. Rock strata exposed at a cliff face. So you can see the different stratas. They have been exposed. That is a strata. We have this one here is another strata. You can see that there is also a strata there, and then we have a lower strata. So they are exposed at the cliff face. Each layer represents millions of years of deposition. So every layer that we are seeing is millions of years of deposition. The movements of the Earth's crust may cause the strata to become distorted. So when there is movement of the Earth surface or Earth crust, the strata may be distorted. It may become mixed up by distortion. Sometimes the strata are vertical or even turned upside down, the oldest rock appearing on top. It is usually possible to tell when this happened. So sometimes you may find that these stratas which we have are becoming vertical. And when do they become vertical? Because of the interruption of the strata. Sometimes you may find them turned upside down. Another time you may find them when they are vertical, but all that one can be seen and you can tell what happened. This is a fossil of a fish which lived 40 million years ago. So when you look at this fossil here, it was also extracted from rocks, and from the rocks it was estimated that it might have lived 40 million years ago. The fossil is a fish, Meoplossus labrocoides, from Eocene era, about 30 to 50 million years ago. The fossil is obvious that of a fish, but the species is not represented among the present day fish. So when you look at it, you can see that it is a fish, but this type of species is not represented among the present day fish. This is a reconstruction from the fossil remain of an armor-plated fish which lived 350 million years ago. So this one is a reconstructed fish which is from a fossil remain of armor-plated fish that is believed to have lived 350 million years ago. The fish which gave rise to the fossil, such as this, were very different from today's fish. So when you look at it, you can see that it is a fish. But if you look at its structures, you can see that it is different from the fish which we have today. By studying the types of fossils and the abundance of each species in the different strata, it is possible to build a picture of how the population of organisms changed over millions of years. So when we study the fossils and their abundance of those particular species in the different stratas, it can give us a clear picture of how the population of organisms changed over millions of years. So now here when you look, this is a region where we had over 400 million years ago. Here it was about 300 million years ago, 200 million years ago, and 100 million years ago. So when you look at those different stratas, you can see beyond 400 million years ago, there were no fish. The number of fish was very little, but it went at 300 million years, it went on increasing. And now here in this period, there were no amphibians, no reptile, no birds. Here now, the number increased of fish, that is 300 million years ago, and then the amphibians started appearing. Then we had also small reptiles. In around 200 million years, we had got a number of amphibians that increased, and then the reptiles were also in small number. In 100 years, we were having now the amphibians present, fish present, reptiles present, and then there were birds also starting in small numbers, and then the increase in number to the recent years. The width of each band represent the relative abundance of the organism as judged by the fossil remains. So when you look at the width, this width here is going to tell you the abundance of that particular organism as judged by the fossil remains during that time. So you can see at around 400 million years ago, the number of fish was very small, but as we reached by 300 million years ago, the number had increased. So you could see that during that time, 300 million years, the number of amphibian was small, number of reptile was small, there were no birds, and the number of mammal was also small. By the time we were in 200 million years, the number of fish was starting to reduce, amphibians had increased, reptiles were increasing, birds had not yet appeared, and mammals, the number was small. By 100 million years ago, we had the number of fish was starting to increase, the number of amphibians had become reduced and become stable, and then the number of amphibian reptiles had also was increasing, and birds were increasing, and mammals were still in the same number. For example, 100 million years ago, there were many more species of reptiles than they are today. So you can see that during 100 million years ago, there were more species of reptiles than what we have today. Mammals do not appear at all in the rocks older than 3 million years ago. So the mammals are not appearing in rocks older than 3 million years ago. Fossils will be formed only in places and at times when the conditions are suitable for fossilization. If the conditions are suitable for fossilization, that is when the fossils are going to be formed. And so they may not be representative of organisms living at a time. So you may find that at a particular time there were no fossils present because maybe during that time the conditions were not suitable for fossilization of those organisms. So fossils were only formed at a time and in places where the conditions were only suitable for fossilization. Only the skeletons, shells, and other parts resistant to decay will be preserved. So you will see that only the parts that are preserved are those parts that are resistant to decay, like the skeletons, like the shells, and the other parts which are resistant to decay are the ones that are going to be preserved. Fossils are found only if they are exposed by earth movement or erosion. So it is really very hard to find fossils unless there has been the earth movement which pushes the rocks to go upwards. Then we can expose the fossilized skeleton, but sometimes it might be the wash down of the parts of the rocks, and when they are washed away, then they can expose the fossilized fossils. Very few fossils have been found which show intermediate stages between different groups of organisms. There are some few fossils that have been found that have shown intermediate stages between different groups of organisms. If organisms were gradually changing, you might expect to find fossil remains showing intermediate stages in the change. That is, if the change of organism was gradual, it was not drastic but gradual, then we would expect to find fossil remains that shows intermediates. Despite of its gap, the fossil record does show that over a million years ago, organisms became more numerous and diverse, and many more species came into existence. So you will see that over millions of years ago, organisms were becoming more numerous, were becoming many, and more diverse. They were becoming more diverse, and many more species were coming into existence as the years were going on. So for example, 500 million years ago, there were no vertebrates. If you go to 500 million years ago, 500 million years ago, there were no vertebrates. And around 350 million years ago, there were no reptiles. 350 years ago, no reptiles were present. And at around 200 million years ago, there were no birds. Here around 200 million years ago, no birds existed. Now, organisms become more complex as years go on reducing. Organisms become more complex. For example, the fish is a more complex organism than the sea anemone. Fish became more complex compared to the sea anemone. Although very few organisms found as fossils are alive today, there are many basic similarities in the body structures of the fossil and similar organisms living today. So when you look at this fish, which was there around 40 million years ago, and the fish of today, you can see that it is not being represented by the fish today, but you can see that the body structures of the fossil are similar to the fish which is living today. For example, fossil remains of fish are unmistakably similar to the present-day fish. Although they are few, there are fossils which show characteristics intermediate between major groups. For example, here we have the classic example of Archaeopteryx, which has features that are common to both birds and reptiles. Archaeopteryx is a fossil that was found in rocks, and it had features that were resembling those ones of reptiles. For example, these ones that you are seeing in blue, the crows, these are features which are for the reptile and the long tail. Then there are these other features which you are seeing in red. These are features of a bird, wings like forelimbs, then having thin ribs. These are features of a bird. Then having feathers. These are features of the bird. So you can see there is an intermediate between the birds and the reptiles. So there are many mammal-like reptiles in the fossil record, and recently a fossil has been found that is intermediate between fish and land animals. So they are finding more fossil records, and these fossil records, they are those ones that are mammal-like reptiles. Then there are those ones that have been found which are intermediate between fish and animal. So fossils are being found out which are showing intermediate between different organisms. Evidence from comparative anatomy. Evidence from comparative anatomy. The basic pattern suggests that these organisms, they have evolved from a common ancestor. These organisms, the structures, the features that we are seeing, they show that these organisms have developed or evolved from a common ancestor by looking at their anatomy. These are vertebral limbs. If you look at this one, this is for the lizard, this one is for the dolphin, this one is for the bird and the bat. But you can see that they have structures which resemble each other, which means that they might have come from the common ancestor. Fish, amphibian, reptiles, birds, and mammals all have vertebral column. They have the skull, they have the brain, they have the circulatory system, and many other features in common. So when you look at them, they have got vertebrates, a vertebral column. So which means that many million years ago, they had a common ancestor, or all of them, they came from a common ancestor. The four limbs of the following vertebrates show the basic pattern of limb bones with modification which are adapted to their method of locomotion. So when you look at this one of a lizard, it is adapted to its mode of locomotion. It has claws. If you look at the end here, it has got claws which attaches on the rocks and material. Then when you look at this one of the dolphin, it is adapted for swimming. When you look at this one of the bird and the bat, they are both adapted for flight. So they have the basic pattern of limb bones which have been modified and adapted for their method of locomotion. So these structures, they suggest that they all rose from a common ancestry form rather than arising independently. Because when you look at the structures, they are similar. If you look at the structure, this bone is the same as this bone, is the same as this bone and this bone. And when you look at these two bones, this and this is the same as this one and this one, is the one, this one and this one, it is this one and that one. And then this side you can see they have these ones, they have those ones, then this one has these ones, and this one has got those ones. So they have got a pattern which is similar in all of them, but adapted for the different activities. The basic pattern of the vertebrate limb represented by the human arm skeleton is shown below. So you can see it also resembles the other organism, one bone, and then it has here two bones and then very many bones joined together. So they have got the same pattern with the other mammals. So although these features are superficially different, there is a basic pattern underlying them all. That one we have seen, the basic pattern, one bone, one bone, one bone, one bone, one bone. Then we have the two bones, we have this and that, you have this and this, you have two bones here, that and that, there is this one and the other one, then we have this one and that one. Then later on we have very many smaller bones there which are joined together, those small bones joined together. You can see them joined together, those small bones joined together. So they have got underlying pattern, basic pattern in all of them. Let's look now at DNA evidence. DNA evidence. Another important line of evidence for evolution comes from DNA analysis. It comes from DNA analysis. Any permanent change in form or function of an organism must be preceded by a change in its DNA. So when we see these organisms changing, coming from here, going on, and then when they reach here, they divert. Others go this different direction, then others continue with the other direction like that. Then when they reach here, these ones will continue in that direction. Then you will see others go on branching off. Meaning that when they are branching off, those branches which are going off, it is a result of the change in their DNA. organisms which have much of their DNA in common must be closely related. For example, they have split from a common ancestor comparatively recently in geological terms. For example, if we look here, you will see that if you come here, you'll see that all these organisms, they had a common ancestor. But when they reached at this point, they splitted. The fish left, and then the others continued with the same ancestor. Then the amphibian splitted. Then we remained with the mammal, birds, and reptile with a common ancestor. Then the mammals splitted. We remained with reptiles and birds with a common ancestor. And then later on, they also splitted. So those organisms which have much of their DNA in common must have closely been related, and they have splitted from a common ancestor comparatively recently. For example, humans and chimpanzees have 99% of their DNA in common, which suggests a close relationship and relatively recent divergence from a common ancestor. If you look here, you will see that this is about globin chain, myoglobin, and then ancestral hemoglobin chain. Then here it again separated the vertebrate, jawed vertebrates, and then these ones with alpha chain. These ones, the ancestral was with beta type of chain, and then these ones went off the mammal fetal with the beta. This one is which one? This chain of fetal mammals. Then here, when you come here, you find this is still going with the beta chain, and then another one here came primates with the beta chain, and then here you have the humans and the apes. For them, they have an alpha, which beta. This one here, the chain is different here. They have a different chain, but the humans and the apes, they have the same chain compared to the other primates. So which means that the chimps and humans, they have about 99% of their DNA in common. And that one means that they are closely related and recently diverged from the common ancestor. The correct interpretation of the evidence is that apes and human had a common ancestor, which was neither ape nor human. So it's not that human came from ape, no, or apes came from human, no, but they had a common ancestor. There was a common ancestor who was not a human and who was not an ape. Then they diverted, they splitted, and we got humans and then we got apes because we are having 99% resemblance. In the course of evolution, this common ancestor produced two lines of descendants, culminating in the modern day humans and the modern day apes. So here we shall have another diversion of humans, and then we shall have a diversion of apes. So there is that diversion, but around here they have a common ancestor. The accepted view of evolution. The accepted view of evolution. Here, earlier there was a fish-like ancestor which moved up. That is the present-day fish. Then it moved up. Here we had an amphibian-like ancestor, the present-day amphibian. Then we went to the reptile-like ancestor, when we have the present-day reptiles. Then there was diversion here to bird-like ancestor, the present-day birds, and then we had this direction, the mammal-like ancestor, the present-day mammal. So that is the accepted view of evolution. Thank you very much for participating in evolution. Please do like, share, and subscribe.